Chapter 7. The Stranger Shows His Face. It was 5:30 when the stranger went into the little parlour of the Coach and Horses, and there he remained until nearly midday, with the blinds down and the door shut, and nobody went near him. All that time he could have eaten nothing. 3 times he rang his bell, the 3rd time loud and long, but no one answered him.
"Telling us to go to the devil, indeed,"
said Mrs. Hall. Soon came the story of the robbery at the vicarage, and that started them thinking. Hall went off with Wadgers to find Mr. Shuttleforth, the lawyer, and take his advice. No one went upstairs, and no one knew what the stranger was doing. Now and then he walked rapidly up and down, and they heard him swearing, tearing paper, breaking bottles. The little group grew bigger. Mrs. Huxter came over. Some young fellows joined them. There was a stream of unanswered questions. Young Archie Harker tried to look under the closed curtains. He could see nothing, but he was soon joined by other boys. And inside, in the darkness of the parlour, the stranger, hungry and afraid, hidden in his uncomfortable hot clothes, stared through his dark glasses at his paper, or shook his dirty little bottles, or swore at the boys outside the windows. In the corner, by the fireplace, lay the pieces of several broken bottles, and the sharp smell of a strange gas filled the air. At about midday, he suddenly opened his parlour door and stood looking at the 3 or 4 people in the bar. "Mrs. Hall," he said. Somebody went and called for her. She soon appeared, a little short of breath, and so even more angry. Hall was still out. She had had time to think now, and had brought the stranger's unpaid bill. "Why wasn't my breakfast laid?" he asked. "Why haven't you prepared my meals and answered my bell? Do you think I can live without eating?"
"Why isn't my bill paid?"
said Mrs. Hall.
"That's what I want to know."
"I told you 3 days ago I was expecting some money."
"I told you 3 days ago I wasn't going to wait. You can't complain if your breakfast waits a bit, when my bill's been waiting for 5 days, can you?"
The stranger swore in answer.
"And I'd thank you, sir, if you'd keep your swearing to yourself, sir," said Mrs. Hall.
"Look here, my good woman," he began.
"Don't call me your good woman,"
said Mrs. Hall. "I've told you my money hasn't come."
"Money, indeed,"
said Mrs. Hall. "Still, in my pocket—"
"You told me 3 days ago that you hadn't anything but £1's worth of silver on you."
"Well, I've found some more."
"And where did you find that?"
said Mrs. Hall. He stamped his foot. "What do you mean?" he said.
"I mean, where did you find it?"
said Mrs. Hall.
"And before I take any money, or get any breakfasts, or do any such things, you must tell me 1 or 2 things that I don't understand, and that nobody understands, and that everybody is very anxious to understand. I want to know what you have been doing to my chair upstairs, and I want to know why you went out of your bedroom and how you got in again. Those who stay here come in by the doors. That's the rule of this house, and you didn't do that. And what I want to know is how you did come in. And I want to know—"
Suddenly the stranger raised his gloved hands, stamped his foot, and said, "Stop!" so loudly that he silenced her at once. "You don't understand," he said, "who I am or what I am. I'll show you. By heaven, I'll show you." He put his open hand over his face, and then took it away. His face became a black hole. "Here," he said. He stepped forward and handed Mrs. Hall something which she, staring at his face, took without thinking. Then, when she saw what it was, she screamed loudly and dropped it. The nose. It was the stranger's nose, pink and shining, rolled on the floor. Then he removed his glasses, and everyone in the bar breathed deeply. He took off his hat and tore his beard and bandages. It was worse than anything they had ever seen. Mrs. Hall, open-mouthed with terror, ran to the door of the house. Everyone began to move. They had expected burns, wounds, something ugly, but they saw nothing. The bandages and false hair flew across the passage into the bar. Everyone fell over everyone else down the steps. For the man who stood there, shouting, was a man up to the shoulders, and then nothing. People down in the village heard shouts and saw the people rushing out of the inn. They saw Mrs. Hall fall down, and Mr. Henfrey jump so as not to fall over her. And then they heard the frightful cries of Milly, who, running quickly from the kitchen at the noise, had come on the headless stranger from behind. Then her cries stopped suddenly. Everyone in the village street, old and young, about 40 or more of them, collected in a crowd around the inn door.
"What was he doing?"
"Ran at them with a knife."
"I heard the girl."
"No head, I tell you."
"Nonsense." "Took off his bandages."
Everyone spoke at once. Suddenly, Mr. Hall appeared, very red and determined. Then Mr. Bobby Jaffers, the village policeman, and then the serious Mr. Wadgers. Mr. Hall marched up the steps, walked straight to the door of the parlour, and found it open. "Policeman," he said, "do your duty." Jaffers marched in, Hall next, Wadgers last. They saw the headless figure facing them, with a half-eaten piece of bread in one gloved hand and a piece of cheese in the other. "That's him," said Hall. "What the devil's this?" came in an angry voice from above the collar of the strange figure. "Well, mister," said Jaffers, "I've got to arrest you, head or no head." "Keep off," said the stranger, jumping back. He took off his glove, and with it struck Jaffers in the face. In another moment, Jaffers had seized him by the handless wrist and caught his invisible throat. He got a hard kick that made him shout with pain, but he kept his hold. A chair stood in the way and fell with a crash as they came down together. "Get hold of his feet," said Jaffers between his teeth to the other men. When he tried to obey this order, Mr. Hall received a great kick in the chest that finished him for a time, and Mr. Wadgers, seeing that the headless stranger had rolled over and got on top of Jaffers, went backwards towards the door, and so fell against Mr. Huxter and another man coming to help the policeman. 4 bottles fell and broke on the floor, filling the room with a powerful smell. "I give in," said the stranger, though he had thrown Jaffers down, and in another moment he stood up, shaking, breathless. A strange thing he looked, without head or hands. His voice seemed to come out of nothing. Jaffers also got up. The stranger ran his arm down his coat, and the buttons to which his empty sleeve pointed became undone. Then he bent down and seemed to touch his shoes. "Why," said Huxter suddenly, "that's not a man at all. It's just empty clothes. Look! You can see down his collar and his shirt. I could put my arm." He stretched out his hand. It seemed to meet something in the air, and he pulled it back with a sharp cry of surprise. "I wish you'd keep your fingers out of my eye," shouted the voice in anger. "The fact is, I'm all here, head, hands, legs, and all the rest of it. But it happens I'm invisible. But that's no reason why you should put your fingers in my eye, is it?" The suit of clothes, now all unbuttoned, stood up. Several other men had now come into the room, so that it was crowded. "Invisible, eh?" said Huxter. "Who ever heard of such a—" "It's strange, perhaps, but it's not a crime. Why am I attacked by a policeman in this way?" "Oh, that's different," said Jaffers. "I can't see you, but I have orders to arrest you, not because you can't be seen,
but because a house has been robbed. Well, and it looks as if—
Nonsense, said the Invisible Man.
I hope so, sir, but I've got my orders.
Suddenly the man sat down, and before anyone could think of stopping him, he had thrown off all his clothes, all except his shirt.
Here, stop that, said Jaffers suddenly. Hold him, he cried. If he gets his shirt off—
Hold him, shouted everyone, and there was a rush at the white shirt, which was now all that could be seen of the stranger. The shirt sleeve struck a blow in Hall's face that sent him backward into old Toothsome, the gravedigger, and in another moment the shirt was lifted up, just like a shirt that is being pulled over a man's head. Jaffers tore at it, but only helped to pull it off. He was struck in the mouth out of the air, and lifted his stick and hit Teddy Henfrey hard on the top of his head. "Look out!" cried everybody, hitting everywhere at nothing.
Hold him!
Shut the door!
Don't let him go! I've got something!
Here he is! Everybody was being hit at once, falling on one another. Sandy Wadgers opened the door and they fell out. The hitting went on. One man had a tooth broken, another a swollen ear. Jaffers was struck under the jaw. He caught at something hard that stood between him and Huckster. Then the whole mass of struggling, excited men fell out into the crowded hall. The battle moved quickly to the house door. There were excited cries of, "Hold him! Invisible!" And a young man, a stranger to the place, rushed in, caught something, missed his hold, and fell over another man's body. Halfway across the road, a woman fainted as something pushed past her. A dog ran growling into Huckster's yard, and with that, the Invisible Man was gone. For a moment people stood, not knowing what to do. And then they ran, scattered as the wind scatters dead leaves. But Jaffers lay quite still, face upward and knees bent. Chapter 8. On the Road. Mr. Thomas Marvel, a tramp, had removed his boots and was sitting by the roadside, airing his feet and looking sadly at his toes. They were the best boots he had worn for a long time, but he hated them for their ugliness and their size. "The ugliest boots in the whole world, I should think," he said. "They're boots, anyway," said a voice. "Yes," Mr. Marvel agreed. "They were given to me. Too large. I'm tired of them. That's why I've been begging for boots, 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 everywhere. But no one has any to give away." Said the voice. "No, I've been begging for boots round here for 10 years. I've got all my boots around here, and now look at them. They're the best they can find for me." He turned his head over his shoulder to look at the boots of the speaker, but they weren't there. There were neither boots nor legs, nothing. "Where are you?" he asked. He saw the road, the open country, but no sign of any man except himself. "Am I mad? I must be seeing things." "No, you aren't," said the voice. "Don't be frightened." "Frightened? Frightened?" said Mr. Marvel. "Come here. Where are you?" "Don't be frightened," said the voice. "You'll be frightened soon. Let me get hold of you. Are you buried?" There was no answer. Mr. Marvel began to put on his coat. "I could have sworn I heard a voice." "So you did." "It's there again," said Mr. Marvel, closing his eyes and running his hand across his forehead. "I must have gone mad." "Don't be a fool," said the voice. "You think I'm just in your imagination, just in your mind?" "What else can you be?" said Mr. Marvel, rubbing the back of his neck. "Very well," said the voice. "I'm going to throw stones at you until you think differently." "But where are you?" The voice made no answer. A stone came whistling through the empty air and just missed Mr. Marvel's shoulder. He turned round and saw a stone jump up into the air, hang there for a moment, and fall at his feet. Another came and hit his bare toes, which made Mr. Marvel cry aloud. Then he started to run, fell over something unseen, and came to rest sitting by the road. "Now," said the voice, "am I just in your mind?" Mr. Marvel struggled to his feet and was immediately rolled over again. He lay quiet for a moment. "If you struggle any more," said the voice, "I'll throw this stone at your head."
"I'm finished,"
said Mr. Thomas Marvel, sitting up and taking his wounded toe in his hand.
"I don't understand it. Stones throwing themselves, stones talking. I'm finished."
"It's very simple," said the voice. "I'm an invisible man."
"Tell me something I don't know,"
said Mr. Marvel, white with the pain.
"Where you're hidden. How you do it. I don't know."
"I'm invisible," said the voice. "That's what I want you to understand."
"Anyone can see that. There's no need for you to be so angry. Now then, give us an idea. Where are you hidden?"
"I'm invisible. That's the point. And what I want you to understand is this."
"But where are you?"
interrupted Mr. Marvel. "Here, 6 yards in front of you."
"Oh, no. I'm not blind. You'll be telling me next you're just thin air."
"Yes, I am thin air. You're looking through me."
"What? Isn't there anything in you?"
"I am just a human being, solid, needing food and drink, needing clothes to... But I'm invisible, you see? Invisible. Simple idea. Invisible."
"What? Are you real?"
"Yes, real."
"Let me feel your hand," said Marvel.
"If you are real." He felt with his fingers the hand that had closed round his wrist, and his touch went up the arm, found a chest, and touched a bearded face. Mr. Marvel's own face showed shock and surprise. "Of course, all this isn't half so strange as you think," said the invisible man.
"It's quite strange enough for me,"
said Mr. Marvel.
"How do you manage it? How is it done?"
"It's a very long story. And besides,
I tell you, the whole business is... I can't understand,"
said Mr. Marvel. "What I want to say now is this. I need help. I need help immediately. I came on you suddenly. I was wandering around, helpless, without clothes, and I saw you."
"Oh, Lord!"
said Mr. Marvel. "I came up behind you, stopped, went on, then stopped again. 'Here,' I said to myself, 'is the man for me.' So I turned and came back to you, and—"
"Oh, Lord!"
said Mr. Marvel.
"May I ask, what does it feel like? And what kind of help do you need, invisible?"
"I want you to help me get clothes and shelter, and then other things. I've left those things long enough. If you won't, well, but you will. You must."
"Look here," said Mr. Marvel. "Don't knock me about any more, and let me go. I must get my breath back. And you've very nearly broken my toe. It's all so unreasonable. Empty earth, empty sky, nothing visible for miles except nature. And then comes a voice out of heaven. And stones, and a hand, Lord!"
"Pull yourself together," said the voice, "for you have to do the work I want you to do." Mr. Marvel's mouth opened wide, and his eyes were round. "I've chosen you," said the voice. "You are the only man, except some of those fools down there, who knows there is such a thing as an invisible man. You have to be my helper. Help me, and I will do great things for you. An invisible man is a man of great power." He stopped for a moment to sneeze loudly. "But if you trick me," he said, "if you fail to do as I tell you—" He paused and took hold of Mr. Marvel's shoulder. Mr. Marvel gave a cry of terror at the touch.
"I don't want to trick you,"
he said, moving away from the fingers.
"Don't think that, whatever you do. All I want to do is help you. Just tell me what I've got to do. Whatever you want done, I shall be pleased to do it."
At about 4 o'clock, a stranger entered the village from the direction of the hills. He was a short, fat person in a dirty old hat, and he seemed to be very much out of breath. There was fear in his face, and he seemed to be talking to himself. Some of the village men noticed him. Mr. Huckster saw him go up the steps of the inn and turn towards the parlour. Mr. Huckster heard voices from the parlour telling the man that he must not go in.
"That room's private,"
said Mr. Hall, and the stranger shut the door and went into the bar. A few minutes later he came out again, rubbing his mouth as if he had been having a drink. He stood looking around him for a few moments, and then walked towards the gates of the yard, where the parlour window was. He leant against one of the gate-posts and took out a short pipe. Although he seemed calm, his hands were trembling. Suddenly he put the pipe back in his pocket and disappeared into the yard. Immediately Mr. Huckster, guessing that the man was a thief, ran out of his shop to stop him. As he did so, Mr. Marvel reappeared, carrying some clothes tied together in one hand and 3 books in the other. As soon as he saw Huckster, he turned and began to run towards the hill road.
"Stop, thief!"
cried Huckster, and set off after him. Mr. Huckster had hardly gone any distance at all when something seized his leg and sent him flying through the air. He saw the ground suddenly move towards his face, and then nothing. Chapter 9. In the Coach and Horses. At the time when Mr. Marvel went into the inn, Mr. Cuss and Mr. Bunting were in the parlour, searching the stranger's property in the hope of finding something to explain the events of the morning. Jaffers had recovered from his fall and had gone home. Mrs. Hall had tidied the stranger's clothes and put them away. And under the window, where the stranger did his work, Mr. Cuss found 3 big books. "Now," said Cuss, "we shall learn something." But when they opened the books, they could read nothing. Cuss turned the pages. "Dear me," he said, "I can't understand."
"No pictures? Nothing to show?"
asked Mr. Bunting.
"See for yourself,"
said Mr. Cuss.
"It's all Greek or Russian or some other language."
The door opened suddenly. Both men looked round. It was Mr. Marvel. He held the door open for a moment.
"I beg your pardon,"
he said.
"Please shut that door,"
said Mr. Cuss, and Mr. Marvel went out.
My nerves are in pieces today," said Mr. Cuss. "It made me jump when the door opened like that."
Mr. Bunting smiled.
"Now let us look at the books again. It's true that strange things have been happening in the village, but of course I can't believe in an invisible man. I can't."
"No, though I tell you I saw right down his sleeve."
"But are you sure?"
said Mr. Bunting.
"Are you quite sure?"
"Quite. I've said so. There's no doubt at all. Now let's look at these books."
They turned over the pages, unable to read a word of their strange language. Suddenly, Mr. Bunting felt something take hold of the back of his neck. He was unable to lift his head.
"Don't move, little men, or I'll knock your brains out."
Mr. Bunting looked at Cuss, whose face had turned white with fear.
"I am sorry to be rough," said the voice. "Since when did you learn to look through other men's possessions?" 2 noses struck the table. "To come unasked into a stranger's private room. Listen, I am a strong man. I could kill you both and escape unseen if I wanted to. If I let you go, you must promise to do as I tell you."
"Yes,"
said Mr. Bunting. Then the hands let their necks go, and the two men sat up, now very red in the face. "Don't move," said the voice. "Here's the poker, you see?" They saw the poker dance in the air. It touched Mr. Bunting's nose. "Now, where are my clothes? Just now, though the days are quite warm enough for an invisible man to run about without anything on, the evenings are cold. I want some clothes, and I must also have those 3 books.